Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the final webinar in our four-part series, which has been exploring how a special kind of investment, which we call change capital, can be used to help arts organizations adapt in creative ways for their future. If you missed any of our earlier webinars in the series, the sessions can be found on NFF's Arts and Culture webpage, and we will share that information with you toward the end of this session. So today we have a particularly special agenda lined up. We are joined by the former leaders of the Cunningham Dance Foundation, who will share with us how they planned and completed the historic closure of their organization, while at the same time both honoring and celebrating the profound artistic achievements of their founder, Merce Cunningham. We believe the story that you're going to hear today is relevant for many arts and culture organizations that are considering questions of legacy or the transition to a post-founder-led existence. So I'm going to start with some introductions. My name is Rebecca Thomas. I'm Vice President of Strategy and Innovation and a Director of our National Arts Initiatives here at NFF. I am joined by my colleague Rodney Christopher, Vice President Consulting Services, who will be managing the Q&A portion of our discussion. And also here today is Holly Sidford, our consulting partner from Helicon. I'm particularly pleased to welcome our three guests, Trevor Carlson, the former Executive Director of Cunningham Dance Foundation, and now a trustee of Merce Cunningham Trust, Lynn Wickern, former CFO of Cunningham Dance Foundation, and now Executive Director of the Merce Cunningham Trust, and Tammy Dillon, former Director of Institutional Advancement at CDF. To kick off today's session, I'm going to briefly introduce all of you to the concepts of capitalization and change capital that are at the foundation of the Leading for the Future initiative. Leading for the Future is an experimental program run by NFF and supported by the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation that invested over $10 million in Cunningham Dance Foundation in addition to 9 other arts organizations. We're going to talk to you today about what change capital is and why it matters, particularly in times like the present when the economy and the artistic landscape are changing constantly and causing many organizations to find creative ways to adapt. Then I'm going to ask my colleagues to talk about how the Cunningham Dance Foundation both raised and used flexible change capital to thoughtfully prepare for and execute their momentous closure. My colleagues are planning to share with you what they've accomplished and learned during a 5-year implementation and planning period. They're going to reflect on planning for organizational closure, how they communicated their plan to stakeholders, attracting funders and funding to their legacy plan, managing staff resources, and ultimately winding down operations and securing their legacy. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Everyone is muted right now and will be throughout the webinar. We encourage you as we go through the next hour to submit any questions that you have for the presenters at any time, and we will get to as many of them as we can during the last 5 minutes. The last 15 minutes. To submit a question, you can use the question feature, which is in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And then finally, within a few days, we will make sure to send everyone an email with both a link to the slides that you will see today as well as a recording of the session. So let's get started. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to begin the session by sharing just briefly some of the concepts of capitalization, particularly those that are relevant for today's discussion, and for those of you who may not have had the opportunity to join us in our previous webinars. Next slide, please. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about why capital and capitalization matter. As you all know very well, great art is created all of the time with limited funds. Yet we see that particularly in times like the present, many great arts organizations lack the flexible capital that they need to realize their artistic ambitions. As one of my colleagues at City Company, Megan Wanlasala, likes to say, healthy capitalization means greater artistic freedom. While capitalization is a big word and sometimes made to sound very complex, it's really just about having enough of the right kinds of resources to pursue artistic mission for as long as your organization's time horizon demands. Capitalization done right supports an organization's liquidity, adaptability, and durability. Let's unpack that for a minute. Liquidity comes down to, does your organization have adequate access to cash to meet its operating needs? Organizations require cash and access to it to manage both the cyclicality and seasonality of their programming, as well as to deal with the unexpected. Adaptability is about having money that is flexible, that allows for periodic changes to how an organization both programs and operates. From time to time, organizations require these kinds of flexible funds that allow for just changes as circumstances change, either internally or in the environment. Funds for adaptability can allow an organization to evolve, to reposition or restructure its organization, to collaborate, to grow and scale, or, as in the case of Cunningham Dance Foundation, to actually contract and close when that becomes appropriate. Durability is really addressing a variety of longer-term organizational needs, and oftentimes we see evidence of durability through the presence of fixed assets or permanently restricted endowments and long-term savings. I will say that there is a hierarchy of need in every organization, and that not every organization needs every type of capital. In fact, I think while many organizations typically focus on durability, which is often equated with long-term sustainability, it's actually liquidity that most arts organizations need to prioritize first. And particularly relevant for today is the concept of flexible funds for adaptability. This is something that we rarely capitalize for, but is so very important in times like the present. So if we're ever going to improve the sector's liquidity and adaptability, we need to get a whole lot clearer about two very distinct kinds of money: revenue and capital. So revenue is money to pay for what an organization already does, year in and year out. This is money to pay the bills, to pay staff salaries, to fund programs, and to cover administration and overhead. Revenue can be restricted. It can be in the form of general operating support. It can be contributed or it can be earned. Ultimately, what matters is that collectively, revenue streams are sufficient to cover the full costs of running an organization's program and operations. Capital is longer-term money. It's money that allows an organization to change what it is capable of doing. It is intended to be episodic and to fund periodic needs that are related to building an organization's liquidity, adaptability, or durability. In the for-profit sector, we widely understand that capital will be invested in ways that ultimately will help companies generate net revenue to support themselves over the long term so that they can innovate and be healthy. In our sector, unfortunately, we rarely equate the investment of capital with revenue generation. And this can make achieving long-term health a real challenge. What I want to leave you with on that slide, sorry, go back one sec, is that all organizations, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, need both capital and revenue to survive and thrive. Okay, so how do organizations obtain capital? I want to start by saying that there is no silver bullet, that this work isn't easy, and there really simply isn't enough money to fully capitalize every organization all the time. Capitalization takes time, and it doesn't happen overnight. But having said that, what we see in our work is that organizations that can adapt and that can grow in a sensible way are the ones that generate, raise, and set aside money so that they can make smart choices when they need to. There are two ways to generate capital. The first is through the regular generation of surpluses, and the second is through occasional infusions of capital, which can be raised either through a targeted fundraising campaign or sometimes through the strategic use of debt, assuming that there's a clear path to repayment. A capital campaign doesn't have to always be for a fixed asset, like a building, just because it's commonly been that way. And in fact, what we've been seeing increasingly in our work is special grant programs that are prioritizing the creation of liquid reserves or that are investing in flexible plans for change. And we're going to tell you about one of those programs right now. In 2007, NFF partnered with Doris Duke Charitable Foundation to launch Leading for the Future. Leading for the Future, or LFF, is an experimental program. It is investing multi-year change capital into 10 performing arts organizations whose logos you see here so that they can implement their plans to adapt during periods of economic and artistic flux. With change capital, these organizations are making changes that impact both how they create and present art and also how they operate, and hopefully doing so in ways that will contribute to both their long-term financial and artistic health. So a quick overview of the specifics of the program. 10 performing arts organizations were selected in 2008 to participate, and each organization received up to $1 million of change capital. We invited each organization to establish its own disbursement schedule, and each organization drew down different amounts over a 4 to 5 year period. In addition, we made available $75,000 planning grants to help each organization not only articulate the narrative and the strategy for their plan, but also to develop 5-year financial projections and success indicators for tracking their progress. The only condition we put on the funds was that the adaptation include developing the capabilities that would allow each organization to sustain the change that they were making over time through the generation of more reliable revenue. While the premise of the LFF program was that organizations would invest change capital in ways that would contribute to future income, we actually consider change capital also to be an important tool for organizations that are considering legacy and even graceful closure. Since LFF is experimental, we made a decision quite intentionally early on in the program to invest in the Cunningham Dance Foundation as it planned not for future sustainability, but instead for its graceful exit. So in this case, the upfront commitment of $1 million from NFF, when combined with a major investment from another national foundation, made it possible for the organization to launch its campaign, to attract new individual donors, to make a smooth transition of its archival assets to the trust, which you'll hear more about today, and finally to sustain Merce's great works. And the last item I want to mention on this slide about LFF is that one of our explicit intentions throughout the program was to disseminate and is to disseminate what we and what our colleagues who we're investing in are learning. Today is just one example of that. I also want to point you, if you are not already familiar with the document, to our most recent publication, The Case for Change Capital. This document goes into a lot greater depth than we can go into today about the Leading for the Future program. And as I'm sure you will undoubtedly notice, the cover of that publication was none other than Merce Cunningham himself. And then finally, before I pass it on to my colleagues, I just want to mention that in February, we will be producing our second major publication, and that one will actually highlight not only the results of the program, but it will also feature case studies of each of the 10 organizations, including the Cunningham Dance Foundation. And now I would like to introduce Trevor, Lynn, and Tammy to tell us more.
Hello. We thought it would be helpful just to quickly outline the legacy plan, to say that the legacy plan was developed with 3 key initiatives, one of those being the 2-year world tour, legacy tour, an opportunity to see Merce's work on the dancers chosen and trained by him, a extensive preservation initiative that not only included the official transfer of items from the Merce Cunningham archive to its owner, the New York Public Library, but also the acquisition of the sets and costume collection from the Cunningham Foundation by the Walker Art Center and the transfer of those items to the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. but as well the creation of what we've called dance capsules, which are a digital resource both used by scholars as well as restagers of Merce's work. And then the third and last component of the legacy plan was a career transition component intended to recognize the commitment of all staff, dancers, and musicians to see through to the end of the legacy plan and make certain that all of the work involved in the legacy plan as defined would go recognized and seen sort of through seamlessly to the end by the same group of people who had been working with Merce in its lifetime. The plan was developed in some ways a bit by, not mistake, but a misunderstanding, frankly, on my part. The Cunningham Board of Directors asked me when I became executive director after having worked in different roles at the foundation to develop a plan for the future, implying a 3-year plan, which is, as most of you understand, standard practice for an organization. I think, having been in close proximity to Merce over a number of years and dealing with the practical issues of seeing someone through their aging process, not only personally but professionally, thought immediately what we were talking about was a plan for when Merce was no longer with us. And so I started thinking about that with my colleague Lynn Wickern, who helped, I think, shape considerably the outcome of the plan based on her own experience in the field. We looked at what was the best way to address this without being personal, and in doing so, we engaged David Burry and Associates, who had been engaged by the company, helping us with some additional grant writing and fundraising, as an outside or third party to come up with an understanding based on a survey given to a number of people in the field who had a certain level of understanding of Merce's work and the history of his company, and asked him to get their honest feedback. What was important about Merce's legacy and what was important about the company, what was important about the relationship that Merce had with his collaborators, and on a number of different points. There was actually, in the end, nine questions asked of each of the participants in the survey. What I think Lynn and I, in the meantime, had assumed was that we had to figure out how to transition from one artistic director to another. We didn't actually anticipate that the outcome was going to look quite like it does. The consensus was it wasn't shocking, but it caused, I think, the probably greatest question raised, and one that was a key point of transition for me, which was from Lynn, who said at a certain point, after having reviewed with the two of us reviewing the surveys, in which so many had noted the incredible involvement by Merce and the critical involvement by Merce personally in his work in the running of the company and so on. Lynn had asked, what would John Cage have done had Merce died first? And it, I think, allowed us to accept the fact that perhaps John wouldn't have expected someone else to administer the company, thinking in a certain way that Merce was irreplaceable in a sense. And that, I think, for Lynn and me, freed up in our minds the obligation, in a sense. I guess it seemed like, well, of course we must continue. And it gave us an opportunity to think of the possibility of not continuing. And so when we thought about what would happen if both Merce and the company were not here, which also gave us an opportunity to think about the other aspects of the organization that served the community outside of the actual performance of the work by the company, but thinking as well about how when scholars came to work with our archivist David Vaughn in the archive, when a piece was licensed on another dance company, what resources were we using in order to provide information to other dance companies to realize Merce's work. And it really helped us to understand what the scope was going to sort of be like, and helped inform how we went about our preservation initiatives. We knew that we were going to change as an organization, and enough, I guess, to the extent that the idea of closing became palatable. Would you say? I mean, it was not an easy decision to come by, but once we sort of got our ducks in a row, we were able to stand behind it quite comfortably, and actually, in retrospect, it was most certainly the right decision, because it's given a freedom and opportunity for change. I think if we had stayed trying to do business as usual, we would have gotten in our own way and in the way of Merce's work being produced by other companies. In the process, we also observed that Merce had established what was called the Merce Cunningham Trust. We knew of this because, in fact, Merce had the idea to transfer the rights to his choreography to the Trust, a separate organization from the Cunningham Dance Foundation. It allowed us to prompt the question to Merce, what would be possible with regard to performance of the work and the rights of the work. And Merce was very clear to say that he didn't think that two organizations needed to exist at the same time, that reassuring our ideas about putting together some sort of plan for formal closure. The plan, as we began developing it, we went through a variety of phases, and the process included Merce sort of casually, without putting him on the spot in a way, which was something I discovered working with him was the way to go over a dinner conversation, to bring something up and see how far the conversation would go. And in fact, in doing it that way, it helped to really, I think, inform some really key aspects to the legacy plan, which included the final performances being in New York, the fact that those were $10 tickets for the final performance, the fact that the career transition was important to Merce, to help support the people involved, and in particular the dancers, and that this closure was something that he wasn't going to say himself, but that it was something that we needed to put before him as a possibility in order for him to accept or not, which was not wildly different than working on a new work with him and the way in which he worked with his collaborators. So when he accepted the plan as laid out, we knew that we'd done the right thing. We continued with the definition of the plan, which prompted questions. In particular, our board had gotten involved, which was a critical key in the process. But as well, we needed, in a way, to canvass our funding base and investigate what was realistic, what were our expectations with regard to fundraising for this. We knew well enough that perhaps some funding would fall out by the simple fact that Merce would no longer be with the company, but we didn't know to what extent people would consider supporting a transition that included a formal closure. We recognized that we were developing the dance capsules, that we were going to be creating a certain number of assets that would be critical in the Trust's ability to continue. I don't think at the time we realized that we were creating the type of assets that would allow the Trust to generate income in order to support some other projects or additional projects. So that was a surprise that we've only really recognized in these last few months. But the campaign in total had come to, we operated at about $5 million a year, and the campaign in total came to about $12 million the way it was originally designed. We were in the middle of discussing the exact structure of the campaign. The key elements were in place when the financial crisis hit. This was also following our having had conversations with some of our key supporters, including Mellon, including NFF and Duke. And so we knew that we had a certain level of support, but we didn't want to jump the gun in announcing our campaign and the legacy plan. There was a certain aspect of being silent about the plan for a certain period of time in order to put something on the table that didn't look like defeat, but rather looked like clear planning for the future, which we thought we were doing and believe we have done to this day. The campaign at $12 million was reduced to $8 million over the next probably 4 months or 3 months after the financial crisis hit. And it was really thanks to the engagement that we had with regard to the planning for the future fund for capital change, that we had an opportunity to work with people here, Rodney and Holly and Rebecca. We had people who were able to explain to us in ways that we couldn't envision, having developed the plan so carefully, how to scale it back without impacting the plan itself. So we scaled back, and we plan to continue our fundraising sort of quietly in a silent phase in order to bring up enough support before announcing the campaign, and observed that Merce's health was not getting better, but getting worse. And we were embarking on his 90th birthday celebration, which pushed us to announce a campaign without 50% support in place. But we had these key grants in place from Mellon and from Duke and NSF. We also had the full backing of our board and their support. So we felt confident we were going to move ahead with this. It was a struggle all the way through until a week before the final performance. We weren't convinced we were going to make it to the end with our fundraising. So we had to make some, aside from the changes that we made in the original structure of the plan and the budget from 12 to 8 million, we also had to restructure our thinking and separate one of the 3 components from the plan based on whether or not we were successful with our fundraising, which was the career transition. So we pulled that out of the budget, and it was approved by the board of directors as a supplemental budget to our 3 years of operating once we engaged the plan. The plan was not to be engaged until after Merce was no longer available to leave the company or no longer with us to leave the company. And his passing in July was what prompted the plan's implementation. We had, through great counsel, again from our lead funders, developed a couple of different scenarios which reflected an accelerated plan, a plan based on a 5-year structure, and then a plan that was based on whether or not Merce would perhaps live until he was 110 rather than 90. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything at this point. I'm about to leave from where we were in developing the plan, taking the tour, and going into our final months. And I also don't know where we are with time. Excuse me. I guess we executed the legacy tour with a number of great surprises in place, including the increase of a number of engagements, the increase. Oh, we're at accomplishments now.
I do. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We're having fun. It's good.
Okay, good.
Well, we skipped.
We skipped
We'll come back.
something.
We'll come back.
We'll come
Okay.
back.
All right. Good.
Okay. We toured to more cities than we'd anticipated. We gave more performances than we anticipated. There was question in the development of the plan as to whether or not there was enough booking to fill up 2 years, or if 2 years was insufficient and that there would be more requests. In point of fact, regardless, the dancers needed 2 years, or rather, the production staff and our team needed 2 years in order to cover the number of pieces that we were planning to preserve. The dancers and staff couldn't have gone more than 2 years touring. So 2 years was the right decision for reasons that we hadn't anticipated in the development of the plan. When we scaled the budget back following the onset of the financial crisis, we had removed a certain number of elements, which included a presenter subsidy, assuming that we would be announcing a legacy tour at a kind of without any advance notice based on Merce's inability or his passing, and that we wanted to be able to help the presenting community support the work. The other thing that we cut out of the plan was the initial intent to preserve up to 50 dances through dance capsules. We had scaled that back to 5. And in the end, we were able to capture 86 of Merce's nearly 200 works. That, in some ways, came as a result of the surprise to us that the dance capsule funding was probably the most interesting component for people to support. We had expected that career transition would be attractive and was attractive to no one but a handful. The tour paid for itself, but that didn't go without great struggle and probably a great deal of overworking for the team on tour for having had to provide so many additional residency activities to rationalize, in some cases, the company's performance fee. Do I want to go back? Yeah, let's go back to, am I okay?
You're fine.
Good. We don't have to look at that photo much longer.
Not while you look at it.
Well, that was in our last 6 months. And, you know, it is to say, you can go back if you want.
There we go.
You look at us. We didn't look that way at the beginning of the tour. Wait today. We had no idea what we were frankly getting into with regard to the preservation. We had substantial assumptions based on what we were able to provide over our years of experience to the field and to our partner organizations who were licensing works, etc. We didn't really understand that the transition was going to require so much work on staff after the tour ended. The culling of the archival materials was a lesson learned for us, and that we as an organization had certain rules or structures in place to help inform a constantly transitioning administrative staff how to preserve and what to preserve on an administrative side. It was, I think, probably that 6-month period was in some ways not enough, but in other ways there wasn't any way that anyone had enough steam to make it through. It changed the role that each person had in the organization probably 2 to 3 times throughout the course of the legacy plan. Job descriptions morphed as necessary, and the tour was, I guess, in some ways was the reason for that. In other ways, it was just sheer exhaustion, I think, from having to change. The challenges that we had with regard to not knowing what the timeline was and who was going to be in place, I think was only made manageable by the fact that the plan was so clearly outlined that if there was transition at any point along the way, it was in place for someone else to take over. There were moments where some of the people whom we regarded and who had supported, and that's in every sense of the word, Merce and his work over the years, raised questions about whether or not we should be closing. It was helpful to have had the time that we had to articulate it for ourselves, and the clarity that we had in developing the plan the way that we did, that it was still something we felt comfortable standing behind, regardless of adverse opinion. And I do think that in some ways adverse opinion changed over the course of the tour and today. I think that probably the greatest asset to the organization was the inclusion of Tammy and her role, which was not is not well defined by her title, but should really, it should include something relative to public relations, and that was really managing before and throughout what the image was that the foundation was created with regard to not only Merce's work, but also the legacy plan, and being able to be clear about articulating that to everyone. It was not just to funders or to our own community or to, our own inner family employees, but also outer family members and press. And it really was a role that I think, too, had to morph based on need, but it was, in the end, one of the greater challenges, I think. Today, the Trust is very active and thriving. A number of works are being staged all over the world. We've just noticed that there are companies who are wanting now to have 2 works in their repertory at the same time, which is a change. We developed fellowships which continue to support the dancers who Merce wanted to work with in his lifetime, and not only supports them, but also supports the ability of the work to get out into the world. It has been enormously helpful to know that the library has the full archive and is making it available to the public, that the works as placed at the Walker Art Center have been seen not only at the Walker in an ongoing and regular fashion since the acquisition, but as well have been provided to other institutions like the Philadelphia Museum of Art for a current exhibition. The only setback with regard to the accomplishments is that the career transition was intended to give people an opportunity, in part, to give people an opportunity to see this through fully to the end with a full level of commitment without having to worry about seeking work or not getting an appropriate break after a full steam ahead execution of a very difficult process, but that Lynn's placement at the Merce Cunningham Trust as executive director didn't allow her to have any time of transition, and her workload is doubled from what it was when we were probably even in the legacy plan,
Yeah.
which is a great accomplishment that the Trust has the resources, and not just the resources left financially by Merce to support its project, but the resources that we, I think, packaged cleanly and provided to the Trust to use in a way as an organization that operates with 3 staff members rather than 43. So that's it. I just rambled us all the way through.
About what we were able to give to the Trust financially.
Oh, well, yeah, but that, you know what, that number, I'm so happy that we made that there, but it has to be understood that that number exists only because we had built into the budget a contingency that was quite hefty and that we received in January, a surprise ramp that allowed us to finish on the upside. But we were neck and neck with the budget and not able to approve the full career transition until 6 months before the end of the legacy tour.
They're still panting.
Can
I say one thing?
Please.
Only that, just to know that there's no way that you're going to hit 0.00 on the day that you close the doors. And there's also a considerable amount of accounting that goes into closing out your balance sheet. So you really need a little bit more money than just what your P&L is going to be for the last fiscal year. So it was an interesting ride trying to make sure that we were going to have the funds to do everything that we wanted to do. And the best scenario is to be a little bit over rather than a little bit under, because our board was absolutely death on a deficit. They did not want to see that, and they were quite stringent in all the reporting so that it wouldn't happen. So anyway, you're going to, in a large organization, be up or down, and we were up, and that was fantastic. So
we also thought at the start of all of this that what we were doing was different enough that we should document it. And we didn't think, we thought it was a change, we didn't think it was a prescription for a single artist-driven organization, but rather an alternative or an option that hadn't been perhaps explored before as a planned closure, but rather in some cases as an outcome. And so we've documented the process, and we'll have a plan case study that will be available in probably January of 2013. Also, the closure date, June 30th was our closure date. It's true that we stopped and closed, but there's a certain amount of work that continues. The actual foundation still exists. Len, Tammy, and I have continued to work a bit. So it's not as cut and dry as you would think if it's something to consider.
Wow. This is Rodney Christopher at NFF. Thank you so much, Trevor. I love being in your presence and hearing the story again. I mean, it's been quite a journey, frankly, and I've said this to many people. I've been at this Friday of last week was the 20th anniversary of the day I started working at Nonprofit Finance Fund. And it's been 15 years with the 5-year break. And I have to tell you that of all the work I've done, this is the work I've been most privileged to be a part of. It has been an incredible piece of work to just have any part of it. I just want to say thank you to all of you. And thank you to everyone who's on the phone. We want to take a moment and see if we have some questions. We have about 10 minutes. And I'm going to see if we have any questions. If I can figure out how to do this. It looks like we do. And bear with me 1 second. I'm a technophobe here. Okay, so we have 2 questions. One is, can the general public see the dance capsule? Lynn?
me, huh? Yes, definitely. We have a mercecunningham.org website, and on that website you can get access through to the dance capsules. It has been constructed with a number of levels. There is a public level where you can see dances, you can see descriptions, some photos, and the site has been developed so that you can see a certain amount of things in a public area, and then if you were interested in licensing a work, for instance, you would be given permission, you would be able to go deeper, and you'd be able to see more videos and more production information and that sort of thing. So it's a hierarchy of permissions. But yes, there's a public level where you can indeed see and get a sense of the 86 dance capsules.
Great, thank you. We have another question. What criteria was used to pick the Walker and the New York Library to receive items from the company?
The New York Public Library was targeted because it was a joint, not on paper, but it was a joint conversation relative to the collection of John Cage. And it seemed most appropriate for Merce's archive to be in the same physical location as John Cage's. And they were both very wisely placed there in their hometown. The Walker Art Center was one of the company's earliest presenters, with a strong history not only as a visual art museum but also a performing arts institution. And it was asking any one institution to change its organizational structure and considering placing the sets and costumes with a single institution. In other words, the costumes perhaps and sets perhaps could have stayed in New York to be near to the archive if they were placed at the Met, which has a costume collection, and perhaps at MoMA, which would be an appropriate place for those sets and costumes by those visual artists. But it meant separating the two from each other, and the goal was to try to keep them together. The Walker recognized that as well as a priority, and has changed its staffing to accommodate costumes.
So we're going to try to accommodate two more questions that are a little lengthy. So the first of those is, what would you suggest if a board has given up and decided to close an organization when there is clearly a void in the community resulting with the organization's close?
Well, there was a void being created in the community when we considered the possibility of closing ourselves. And so we considered making a transfer of assets to the trust in order for the trust to pick up where that void is created. So I guess the suggestion is to consider what's to be lost if an organization either needs or has to or wants to close, and how to prepare to transfer those assets so that it can be picked up by another institution.
And this next question is sort of related, actually. It starts with, thank you for your wisdom and sharing your experience. I wonder how quality will be maintained when works are set on other dance organizations. I guess that includes maintaining the dance technique so that dancers will be able to perform the work up to the standards necessary.
Well, that was the same question we had when we were considering the Merce Cunningham Dance Company maintaining the quality of Merce's work. So it was a challenge regardless. If Merce was no longer there as the artistic advisor to his company, the work was inevitably going to change. And so how could we support the opportunity for change, and what could we store and record as best as possible to continue to maintain as resources for people using Merce's work in one way or another, either as source material or the actual performance of his work. So I don't think that we as an institution, we're not going to be able to comfortably transition into a museum organization after having been a presenting organization. So we just did what we could in order to preserve as much as possible by the people we had in place.
But I would say that that the people that stage Merce's work, that the company asks for a license, and the procedure is that a stager goes to the dance company and that it trains and or works with the designated dancers in order to create Merce's work in the best quality. And we have certain guidelines that they follow so that it won't be the same. We realize it won't be the same, but it is still underneath the care of how it should be done is still being administered by the trust.
Great, thank you, Lynn. We have roughly 1 minute before we turn this back over to Rebecca. Is there anything, Tammy, you've been wonderfully quiet. I'm not used to because you have so much to say that's really wonderful. So, is there anything you would like to offer to the field about your experience in this process?
I think it's really considering taking a hard look at what the reality is. I think the fact that the company would not be artistically or financially viable was something that you didn't look at first, but became very apparent. And then it became, I think, easier to start to move forward with making a plan. I think the one thing that maybe wasn't mentioned is it's essential to have to understand who owns the rights to the work and how the legal structures are set up. I think other organizations have failed because that wasn't made clear, or it perhaps could have been established in a way that prevented problems. The Merce Cunningham Trust, when it was formed, both Merce and the foundation assigned all ownership to the work to the trust. So it was very, very clear that the trust owned the rights to Merce's work. And I think that's maybe the only point that Trevor didn't eloquently touch on. That is a really important point. And the other, we just kept going. I mean, you know, there were times when we didn't know if we were going to make it, and we just kept going. And we did. We never lost belief. And I think that's also maybe important.
And certainly from my perspective, really inspiring, frankly. What I wanted to just remind folks is that there will be a case study telling the story in greater detail. I've had the opportunity to read a draft of it. It's really quite wonderful. And I encourage you to keep your eyes open. And one of the places you're going to find out about it is, in fact, NFF's own Arts Resources page on our website, which is listed here. When it's available, you will be able to access it. You will also be able to access other things. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Rebecca, to close us out.
Thanks, Rodney. I want to say a huge thank you to Trevor for sharing with us your remarkable story, and a thank you to your entire team, including Tammy and Lynn, for being such wonderful partners and doing such really amazing work over the last several years. It's been a real privilege to know you. I want to thank all of you who joined us today on the phone, and those of you who posed such great questions. We will be sending out an email very soon with today's presentation and a recording of the session. And we also invite you to join the website that Rodney pointed out to learn more about NFF's work in the arts. You can also catch some of the additional webinars that we've done over the last several months on this site. And then finally, I'll just say, if you are not on our arts email list and would like to receive our regular newsletters, please just send us a note, and we will make sure to add you to the list. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.